This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Spring Creek Model Trains. Family owned for nearly 25 years, Spring Creek is your destination for model trains. Check out springcreekmodeltrains.com for a wide variety of offerings from today's top manufacturers and exclusive products found nowhere else. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, or at a train show near you, stop in and say wow. To see where they'll be next, visit their website at springcreekmodeltrains.com. Hey, don't forget to submit your answer for the question of the month, our new feature where you get to be heard on Around the Layout. Our question this month: what commodity does your model railroad move the most of? Go to aroundthelayout.com/question and tell us what that commodity is, where it comes from, where it goes, and why. Answers must be received by July 22nd. So again, aroundthelayout.com/question. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. It's time to find out what's happening in model railroading. And to do that, joining me, the editor of Model Railroad News, Tony Cook. Tony, good to see you.
Hey, Ray, how you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. It hasn't been that long since we've seen each other because this is the actual time that we do What's Happening, but earlier in the month, we had a really awesome chat, a little special that we did with Craig Fuller. It was only like a week ago or so ago, but boy, it feels like a bunch of weeks with the way things have been busy. And I know you've been a busy man too.
It is. It's, this summer is just flying by. I was just emailing my friend Tom Jacobs the other day and said, I hope we had a good 4th and I can't believe it's already past us. So yeah.
It's clicking by, but yeah, it was really great. We got to talk to Craig Fuller, the CEO of Firecrown. Hopefully folks have listened to that interview episode, and boy, just really cool to be able to talk to him and hear about the future of model railroader.
I'm excited by all the stuff. That's why I wanted to talk to him. I was so glad when he made time for us for that special podcast we did with Craig Fuller of Firecrown Media, who of course is the new owner of the Kallenbach titles, and just exciting stuff. And neat to see. And I have had more messages, emails in this last week of, wow, that was a cool show. In fact, somebody said I subscribed to Model Railroader several years ago, kept it 1 year and dropped it because it's like, and the person, they said to me, I felt like it lost its mojo. And I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah. And it's like, but now listening to this, like I'm excited. And so I said, yeah, I'm too. It's very cool. Although, and I hate to do this, and I hate to do this to both you, Ray, and your audience. We were talking about different things that we enjoyed, and I think Craig Fuller mentioned that Business Wars podcast.
Yeah.
Well, I dug into it the other day, and I've been listening to about a 3 or 4 part thing on Toys R Us versus KB Toys in the 80s, 90s. And when I said I hated to do this, when they play little clips and stuff from commercials, and this is a horrible earworm, but I'm gonna do it. I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid. Oh my God, that has been in my head all week. Remember that commercial? Oh,
I think you just passed the earworm on to me because I'm sure I'll have you hearing that thing.
I hope it's out of my head now. But boy, Craig Fuller was right. That's an awesome podcast. And man, KB Toys, you're not old enough because I think you're born about 1980.
Oh, I remember KB Toys.
Oh, but you don't remember. I remember KB Toys in like the 1970s and early 80s when I was mowing lawns and making like $5 per yard to mow a yard. And man, I grew up in the St. Louis area, and there were a couple of KBs that we hit at there was Alton Square had one on the Illinois side, and Jamestown Mall in the north part of St. Louis had the better KB Toys that I thought. I'm sure they probably had both the same thing, but I always felt like I found the better deals there. And that one whole side of the store, like as you walked in, the right main aisle was all hobby stuff. And I mean, it would be stacked high with like Bachmann, Lionel HO, all those freight cars, and they'd have the KB Toy sticker on them, 3 for $5.
Yeah.
I mean, I hauled more like U-18Bs and Jeep 30s out of that place. It's still today when I pick something up on eBay and see that KB Toy sticker, it's like, oh, what I'd give to go into a KB Toys. Yeah.
See, I would probably remember the era that they probably had more of like the lifelike stuff in it, and maybe a little bit of Tyco and that in the KB toy stores. And they survived, at least in my area, I think just into the 2000s, and then they disappeared. But yeah, that was like the toy store in the Eastbrook Mall in Mansfield, Connecticut. Yeah, I used to go there for.
They were so awesome. And yeah, that combination of, sure, they had toys, but again, like in their name, it was KB Toy and Hobby. And yeah, that one whole aisle was just really a hobby shop. They had HO stuff. They had some they had some Lionel O. And yeah, that Business Wars podcast is awesome because it gives you that whole history on how Toys R Us developed and how KB Toys started. In fact, it's out of my head now, but the K and B, they tell you it's like a pair of brothers.
Oh, okay.
It's almost like the something brothers is the B is brothers. It's like, oh, that's what that stood for. I didn't know that.
Right.
But yeah, it's very cool. It's a fun podcast.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's definitely neat to hear the business side. And certainly for us, it was neat to hear the business side from Craig Fuller, even about Firecrown and what they plan to do with the titles of Model Railroader and Trains, and kind of tipping Trains a little bit more towards being a business to business model. And, it's really neat. And you made a great point in that podcast about the interest, even though we're model railroaders, the interest we have in the business of actual railroading is really neat. That all that inside baseball stuff just makes it, and I think it does affect our modeling. I mean, it is neat to remember that it is a business and that it is to produce, it is run for profit, and helps a little bit in the operating kind of things as well.
That's always, when he mentioned that on Lycan biographies and business histories, it's like, oh, that's right up my alley. Because anything I have an interest in, whether it's like trains, railroading, the hobby, cars, or like movies and TV, as much as I like maybe Ford and Lincoln, I also love reading books on, well, here's the challenges that Ford was facing in the 1960s and what they were trying to do. And I mean, those kind of things, I think it's fun to see the challenges and the different things businesses do that for things that we know so well. It's a fun read. Or watch, as he mentioned, he sees all those documentaries on YouTube a lot. And yeah, I catch those too anytime I see like, what went wrong with the Edsel? It's like, well, I know, but let me see this, because it's always fun to hear this story again. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of that really cool inside baseball business stuff that's really fun. And yeah, so great interview with Craig, and really left a lot of confidence in the future of those magazines. And
yes,
we don't, like we said, you don't want to ever see a great title like that go away. And it was diminishing. And we did talk about that in the podcast. And the magazine seemed to be 100 and down to, a thinner, much lighter, I guess, version of it. But I'm hoping that we're going to see a lot of, like you said, mojo. That's an Austin Powers. I'm thinking about Austin Powers getting the injection, right? Like hopefully Craig Fuller and the team at Firecrown will give that same mojo injection
get the mojo back. As I say, right. I smiled at that. Like, I kept it for the year I subscribed, but then I quit because I felt like it lost its mojo.
It's mojo, baby. Yeah. Awesome. Good stuff. So got some other things going on as well. I got to go to Bethlehem to the N Scale convention, in the time that we've been have talked last. What's a really good thing if you want to be safe and not spend a whole lot of money? Go to a scale that you don't model and go to their show. That's what I did. And
I was just thinking that when you started to say that, but here's the problem. I've done that kind of stuff before where I've gone into like a hobby shop that I know, well, it's all like Lionel and toy trains, so I should be safe. And then it's like, well, now, this is kind of cool. And then I'm stuck. So no, it would not have worked for me, I'm afraid. Plus, I think you ran into Mike Zucker there. And he's an N-scaler that I'm sure is trying to convert me to 1/160. So yeah, it'd been tough.
I had a great conversation with Mike Zucker, and it was tempting. He had an awesome setup there, as they normally do at these shows, Spring Creek, with their travel and road show. And I got to meet Mike and the family, and Yeah, it was tempting. Even I said, that would look good on a shelf. I may not run N scale. I mean, the pressure was there, Tony. I mean, there was a lot of guys that were like, Ray, come over to our side. We'll welcome you with open arms. And I just wanted to say, I know that we tip heavy on HO on the show, and I want to make sure, everybody knows this isn't a show of scale. It's all scales. It just, so happens to be, I'm kind of embedded a bit with the HO guys, but we have talked to N scale guys. I mean, Dean Ferris being a phenomenal N scaler, and we certainly will have more on the show in the future, but it was really neat. And it was really cool to see not only the products that are available for N, we've talked about that as well. Just the availability of N scale stuff just seems to continuously improve, and the technology that they have available in them, where, I saw one that, would, DCC sound and now capacitors in an N scale locomotive now available. Yeah. That right there, coming from an operating standpoint, when you're able to put capacitors in an N scale locomotive, and that improves operations tenfold. It's almost a must have. So the stuff that's becoming available for N scale is really wild and tempting, very tempting.
Oh, and that one, I think that convention is what the N scale enthusiasts, and I get their magazine. And Fred Hoxie's involved in that group, and he always sends me the high-res images of all the and they do so many cool releases. In fact, they've just got, I think they're the Intermountain enclosed auto racks. They're doing a series of those using the Union Pacific Heritage paint schemes. So like the Chicago Northwestern, Rio Grande, SP, all those heritage schemes that were on like the 70 Ace diesels are putting on the sides of those auto carriers, and I've already had an email on, wow, this is really cool. I wish these were real. And yeah, the N-Scale Enthusiast magazine, if you're not familiar with them, Google N-Scale Enthusiast. They've got a magazine, they've got a website on it, but they've got so many neat things. And the magazine is great because it's got contributions from folks from like Intermountain and ScaleTrains and Atlas and Microtrains and different columns on vehicles and other things. If you're an N-Scale person and N-Scale Enthusiast is not on your radar, it should be, because as an HO person, it's on my radar somehow. Yeah. And I can't put it down some days. I'm like, this is really cool. I wish I had that.
Yeah, it was. And I got to talk to a couple folks there from that group. And they were busy. I mean, it was a really hopping place. They had it at the Wind Creek Casino in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Excellent place for it, because right out the back window of this casino was all the old Bethlehem steel mills. In fact, that's where the casino is, in the old Bethlehem steel mills. So, wow. And then there was like a walking tour, I believe you can do, of the steel mill that was next to it. And then I took some photographs. We become friendly with Kevin Tully of Tully Models and Scale Modeling by Kevin J. Tully, who does a lot of the steel mill stuff. So I was out back with my long lens camera taking pictures of like the old cars, like the old flask looking cars. I'm not, Kevin's the expert on steel mill and what they use. I just see a whole bunch of really old cars that looked super cool sitting on sidings. And I snapped a bunch of photos and sent it to him. And then I went around and found a couple back roads and found where the old, I think it was called the Philadelphia, Bethlehem, and New England Railroad that kind of supported there. So there was like, and I know it's a different name now, but some of the locomotives still have that old name on it. Took a picture of their yard, and just really neat. It's right by the Lehigh line, the NS Lehigh line, and got to do some rail things. So great place to pick for an N-Scale convention. Oh. You mix that prototype in with the modeling. It's really cool destination to go. So that was really good. And then before we leave Bethlehem, I went over and spent some time with the guys over at the Fremo N room. They actually put them in a room, and that was a really nice sized N-Scale Fremo layout, and they all connected, and they left them in there, and I guess they got to stay there for quite a while in that room. And I think they were talking about guys who were going to hang out till midnight running trains. So they were pulling kind of all-nighter stuff. Got to send the N-Scale ATLP 2022 box car on its maiden voyage around that layout a couple times, and got to meet its DeBob's or DeBob. Mm-hmm. He's got an N-Scale channel. Got to meet him and John O and Dennis and a bunch of other folks that came up and showed interest in the car, and got to talk to them and got to check out the N-Scale stuff that was going on and get to hear a little bit of their story. So it was a great time. It was really cool definitely worth the trip down to Bethlehem. Of course, I mixed it in with some rail fanning as well. I only got to go to the show portion of it. I know that they had an entire convention wrapped around this event. And then I heard rumor that it's heading your way for next year.
It is, yes. The third week of June 2025. And they were here maybe 10, 12 years ago. I remember going. It's in Overland Park over on the Kansas side of the Kansas City Metro. Really great spot that they picked. It looks like it's the same one they did many years back. But yeah, again, go to InScale Enthusiasts and look for or Google InScale Convention 2025 to get more information. But yes, it'll be in the Kansas City area in June of next year, which seems a long way off, but as fast as time is flying anymore, Ray, it'll be here before we know it.
Yeah, we were talking about a whole bunch of events that now seem to be on top of us. And we're saying, it'll eventually be here. And, they're either here or gone. But one that's right on top of us right now is the 2024 St. Louis RPM. And I am absolutely pumped up to get on a plane this coming Thursday and head to St. Louis for what should be 3.5 days of a lot of fun out there out in St. Louis.
It is always an awesome show. I spent about an hour on the phone last night with my assistant editor at Model Railroad News. Shane Mason was calling just, well, we're a week out. By this time next week, we'll have already had our first barbecue meal. And I was like, yep. So yeah, we're getting ready. From the Second Section podcast, I know we've got both. Mike Ostertag always comes down, but Andy Dorsch is going to be there too.
Right.
There's a lot of, I think, first-time manufacturers. I just saw Aurora Miniatures is going to be there this year.
Awesome.
And, of course, I've been saying Bachmann and Broadway Limited are first-time folks. And then, of course, always there's ScaleTrains and Rapido and Athearn, Tangent Scale Models. So there's tons of manufacturers, lots of historical societies. But, yeah, the St. Louis RPM is just a fun weekend. So... And at least right now, looking at it as we record this, we're a few days out still from it all happening, and the weather forecast doesn't look bad. I'm always worried of that 105 degrees with 100% humidity. I'm like, it doesn't look bad. So we'll see.
Yeah, we don't need NMRA National Convention in Texas weather. We're definitely a little bit cooler would be good, especially, it's been warm up here in New England. So it sounds about the same, but hopefully nice and cool and us to be able to get out. Now, how long have you been going to the St. Louis RPM, Tony?
At least, I don't know what year it's in, but more than 10 years and probably closer to 20. I'd have to stop and think about when's the first time I went. I mean, it kept getting bigger every year, and I always knew the Naperville one in the Chicago area and the Bay Area one in California, and just always assumed that those were big deals because the Chicago and the San Francisco area. I thought, well, the St. Louis one can't be, it's a good show, but I'm sure these others are much, much bigger. And as St. Louis just kept getting bigger and better, I would hear so many people saying, oh, man, you're so lucky that you're able to go to the St. Louis RPM every year. It's the best one. And I'm like, really? I didn't know that because I still have yet to be. I haven't gone to any other RPMs. I want to go to Michelle Kempema's first one out in Greeley this fall in the Denver area that I do want to do that. But yeah, Naperville I've always wanted to go to, and Bay Area as well. But no, the St. Louis one is awesome. It keeps getting bigger. That convention center they use over on Collinsville, which is across from downtown St. Louis. It's about 20 minutes actually east of that. So it's not like it's across the river, but that convention place, it seems like every year there's another section of it where, they have those walls that they can kind of roll out and change to make the area bigger. That seems to get bigger and bigger. And then they've got at least 2 rooms for presentations. When I get there, the first thing I always do is grab a schedule and look at who's talking about what, because there's always something awesome and usually prototype related that catches my attention, of somebody talking like, here's this railroad's whatever branch, or this guy's going to talk about Pullman Standard hopper cars. And it's always entertaining things to catch. So it's a wonderful event. You're going to have a great time.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. I was actually on the phone with Lonnie Bathurst, who's kind of in charge of the whole thing there at the St. Louis RPM, helps make it the great event that it is. And I'm surprised Lonnie even called me because he is just busier than a 1-hour paper hanger. He's going like crazy and kind of out of breath. And I was like, save it, because you got other stuff to do. And then I saw he was on with our good friend Jim Wiggin from Athearn last night. And did the Athearn extra. And then, but yeah, he was talking about it, and he's like, yeah, I remember, Tony would come with his dad, and so you've been coming, going for quite a while. It's great that you've been able to go with your dad and be able to share that event. And that's really cool too. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it and trying to put together an agenda for the whole thing. And for anybody that knows me, I like Bethlehem. I like to mix my model railroad events with a little bit of prototype railroading as well. And I know you do too. And you've talked about doing some rail fanning. Talk about a little what one could expect if they go out and do a little rail fanning in St. Louis.
The one thing we had always traditionally done is that Friday night, the RPM is Friday and Saturday, and we get into town Thursday night, and everybody tends to descend upon Bandanas, which is a barbecue place right by the convention center there in Collinsville. That's kind of the meetup. So that's the beginning of it all. And then Friday, we're there at the RPM all day. Friday evening, we usually go and barbecue again, and go over to Kirkwood. And Kirkwood, Missouri's on the west side of the St. Louis area, kind of just basically a suburb now. In fact, I used to live south of there in Crestwood, Missouri years ago. And Kirkwood, we go there, and on the hill is the old Mopac line. It's kind of the high point there where the Amtrak station sits. I'm sure you've probably seen pictures of that Kirkwood Depot. And we sit there for the evening. And there's a group of rail fans that are always there every time we've been. Like Friday nights, there's a whole group of guys that they bring their lawn chairs set up and are always just sitting there. Because like the first couple of times I'm like, I didn't see these guys at the RPM, but maybe that's why they're in town. And no, they're just St. Louis. That's like, yep, we show up here Friday nights and just kind of sit around talking and watching the trains. And so, yeah, we do that. And then Saturday, we usually try to sneak away from the RPM for a while and hit, some of the rail yards and do a little bit of rail fanning here and there, and then back to the show again. So, and then Shane and I follow on the way back. We go up and over northern Missouri and follow the Norfolk Southern from Hannibal across Missouri. And last year we caught a great train with a ton of the big 85-foot high cube auto box cars. And it was right when Class 1 Model Works had just announced a bunch of those. So it was like, oh, man, get pictures of all those, because those are some of the things they're doing. And so, yeah, it's a fun trip.
What's it like in the mind of Tony Cook rail fanning? Are you watching trains go by and go, ScaleTrains, Athearn, Tangent? Do you sit there and go, Class 1 makes that one? It's got to be hard to put that encyclopedia in your head away.
It's kind of like that. I mean, a lot of times, yeah. Like I'm about 45 minutes east of Atchison, Kansas, is like directly west of me. And I'll put the dog in the car some days and head over there on the weekends and park on that UP line, and they run it. It goes up to Marysville, and all the trains that go through there are westbounds. So we usually go to like Dairy Queen or McDonald's. I pull into a parking lot there right in Atchison where they come around the corner, and yeah, literally have my camera. And as you jump out, of course, the locomotives are always exciting, but all those freight cars are like, yeah, I think that's so-and-so's tank car, or, oh, I need a picture of that hopper. There's one with the patch reporting marks. I want to send that to Athearn because they were talking about this or that. Yeah, everything you look at with an eye of, oh, I think that's that new Atlas tank car,
See, I'm worse, because when I start to see stuff, it's like, where can I find one of these? Where can I find one of those? Where can I find? And it happened to me here recently. And I actually had a rail fanning first. And of course, when I say rail fanning, I also love to have the cameras with me and taking photos. And I actually had a first. I actually captured the same Class 1 locomotive it's actually the same line months apart.
Oh, cool.
Which was kind of neat to me. 6957. It's a EMD SD 60E. And I was like, oh, I've actually photographed this one before, because I'm always looking through like BNSF. I go down to Texas and photograph there, and the other line, CSX, the River Line, or the Albany Division, the old BNA, and then of course out the New York Central all the way to Buffalo. But I've never had the same locomotive ever captured twice apart. And I finally did it, and then a photographer came up that was very familiar with the line. And I said, it seems like you guys always get these SD60Es. And he goes, yeah, I'm sick of these things. And I was like, what is that? And he goes, they're the only ones that have PTC, and I think they call it ACES, but ASCES or whatever. They're the only locomotives that can lead on this line. I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. He goes, I said, I like them. They're a pretty cool looking locomotive. And he goes, yeah, but he goes, they're always the leader. He goes, so even if we get a heritage unit, it's buried in the consist. So we don't even get it leading. So I was like, yeah, but, and then I ended up finding one. Athearn made a Athearn Genesis one from 2017, 2018. So I found one, and now I've got it set aside with my MacRail components to make it compliant for PTC and put all that on it. So yeah, but nonetheless, so that's what happens with me when I rail fan. It costs me money because I'm looking at stuff and falling and liking it. And then I start looking it up and probably have to ask you, hey, where can I find one of these?
It's fun when that'll match up. I think I reviewed in the last couple months, Aurora Miniatures did an absolutely beautiful, I'm trying to think who the prototype is. It's a Railgun, one of those like rib side, brand new ones. And I'm trying to think, I can't think now who made it. But again, I'm doing the review of it, and I'm like, I remember seeing one of those go through Atchison. I bet I took a picture of it, and I'm digging through my folders and looking at my pictures, and I'm like, oh yeah, there's one of them. Let me see. And I bring it up out of the whole, and there's like a couple of hundred in the roster for these. It was the exact model that Aurora Miniatures had sent me for review. So again, out of the 12 SKUs they produced for the HO model, they picked that one road number. And out of the hundreds of prototypes that I just happened to be snapping pictures of and caught, it's like, oh my gosh, that is the car, the model. And that's always a fun, like, oh, cool.
Yeah, that's a really awesome catch to be able to do that.
Lots of news to get to. And we like to say, I was trying to decide. We did. It seems like we were a little off on our schedule in June or something. I can't remember, because when I was looking at this, like one time we had a couple of shows fairly close together, but I never am at a lack for news.
Yeah.
And I've got a bunch of stuff, and I'm going to start it off with that Athearn announcement that Jim Wiggin and I actually did up in Deschler, Nebraska, when you were in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Week, the week of the InScale convention. Jim and I were there Thursday at Spring Creek in Deschler and announced the Genesis HO Scale SD50 diesel locomotive and the Genesis HO Scale Rio Grande International Car caboose models coming for HO Scale. And the SD50 has been available before. It was never old enough that it's a blue box, even though the prototype goes back to the early 80s and it coulda, woulda, might have been. But the SD50 was originally a ready-to-roll model, and it was a very good model for, it was a modern tooling, nice piece, but again, a little bit limited in the fact that I think out of Rio Grande's roster of 5501 to 5517, over the years, they've probably done about 4 or 5 production runs. I think they've done every one of those Rio Grande numbers, but it was never road accurate in that they had kind of a one body. So it never had the nose light, that kind of stuff. So again, nice move that it's going to be an all new tooling, fresh take on the SD50s, which I always like those. That's the successor, or was to be the successor, for the SD40-2 for EMD, although GE kind of started to pull ahead at the time. So the 50, 60, 70s never were quite the kings that the SD40s were, but the 50 is a sharp looking locomotive. And typical of the Genesis style and approach out of this group that they've announced, every one of them is unique to the point. Some of the things surprised me, like Kansas City Southern, when Athearn had asked me for prototype pictures. As I pulled them, I saw that KCS had this odd duck, like 3-light fixture between the number boards over the cab up front. And had like this extra third light that was hanging below. I'm like, it's like, let me get a picture without that thing on it, because that can't be right. I'm sure they didn't do that in the model. And yeah, all the KCSs had that. And then the KCS also has that rounded inertial air blower housing that kind of sticks out behind the cab on the long hood. They had that older style, which I didn't realize any SD50s had that. I always think of the 50s with that slanted blower on the side and the handrails go up and over it. But KCS got some of the very first, and so theirs has that look of like an older EMD, and like that's in the Athearn run. Those are white with the big red KCS. There's Chessie System in the group, Rio Grande, as I mentioned, Chicago Northwestern, CSX, but lots of good stuff. And I mean, they'll do tons more stuff ahead, but that's announced. And then the other thing I was really excited about that day was the announcement for the Rio Grande International Car Wide Vision cabooses. And that's a model I've always thought those Rio Grande cabooses were sharp. They bought 2 orders of those. They're similar to the old traditional, like, blue box wide vision caboose, but as with all those things, once you get to looking, no, all of them are a little bit different. So that has never been done outside of brass. Rio Grande bought, I think, 15 of them in 1966, then returned in 1976. When you think about how cabooses were gone by the mid-'80s, that's about as late as you get to be buying new cabooses. And in 76, they buy 10 more. And there are differences between the two. The 66 are just old enough that they've got the up and over ladders on both ends and, the running boards on top, whereas the 76 group doesn't have the access to the top. They actually have grabs going up the side next to the wide vision cupola to clean the windows and such. So they're like a modern version. And Athearn's knocking out both of those styles in the first group. And this will be a caboose that also has DCC, and I believe it's the Soundtrack Sound Car feature. So you can do, like, if it's got a backup, the little toot whistle that some of those would have, it'll do that. And it's got lighting, but just a fantastic surprise, cool announcement on both those. I say Rio Grande items, but the 50s have got a ton of road names, including those neat armor yellow Missouri Pacific units are in there too. There's 2 road numbers for those, but Athearn.com is a place to go and look for that. The other thing on Athearn that I saw this month that I haven't dug in deep enough yet to look at it, but I don't know if it's the first time it's been back as Ready to Roll, because I've had a couple of people ask, and it's like, boy, I thought it was, but maybe this is its first return. The old Athearn pickle car, with the like 3 or 4 vats in it's a little short 40-foot car that is coming back as Athearn. I don't know if it's in the Roundhouse or the regular Athearn line. I'd have to look at that again. But Athearn.com, and if you go to their website, go to the new announcements tab, and you can see everything that was announced this July. But lots of cool, fun stuff there. And again, it was a blast. We had a great day up in Nebraska at Spring Creek. Jeff Zucker was our host, and Dave and Deb Zucker were there with Jim Wiggin and I, and we went and ate. We had great hamburgers at the one restaurant that's reopened there in Deschler, and just spent the day talking trains and doing videos. And
yeah, definitely looked like a fun place to be for sure. And then, of course, hanging out with Jim Wiggin is always a good time. So
it was a good show. Good show.
Going back to the SD50s, I was kind of impressed that it actually survived long enough to be in YN2 paint from CSX.
Yes,
stayed on the road quite a long time. I'm not one that's overly strong on locomotive models. I know some, but not all in the history like you do. But yeah, I was pretty impressed. It was in Chessie System, and then made it long enough to be in CSX YN2 paint too.
I think what they're doing, 2 CSX, the YN2, and is that, unless I'm confusing myself here, they've got one of the dark blue. I think they call it YN2.com, or it's got the .com under something.
Yeah,
but yeah, some of those.
That's YN3. Yeah, YN3. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking. But that's, they some of them are really pretty close to recent. In fact, the third quarter diesel era, I'm covering Rio Grande's SD50s, and they were done originally in diesel era in one of the first years of the publication in the early 90s when they weren't that old. So they were all still Rio Grande and nothing had happened yet. So the fun thing about this revisit, not only has the magazine gone all color since then, so it's a color look at everything now, but this is all history. These aren't contemporary locomotives anymore. So I cover SP repaints, Union Pacific repaints. One of them, sadly, there's one that was wrecked in Roswell, New Mexico. If you're ready for your conspiracy theories, 5507 is wrecked in Roswell by secondhand owner Southwest Railroad, and it gets cannibalized into, they pull its HTC 6-axle truck and drop what looks like a little Athearn Hustler switcher shell on top. It's just a traction motor thing to work at like a industrial plant or something. So it's like, oh my gosh, that's all that remains of 5507 is its like front or back truck. And then it's got this little like tractory thing stuck on top of it. It's like, wow. But it's a great article, and that's third quarter diesel era. And I'm working on it as we speak. So it would be out from White River. Oh, I probably should be out, I think, sometime in August. I think it goes to press late July. So I still have a couple weeks on it. So in August, that'll come out. And I also have CPKC's first couple of painted units. I've got pictures and coverage of all that. So that should be fun.
Awesome.
But yeah, the 50s, EMD stuff seems to hang around forever. As popular as GE is today, I'm eager to see how that works. Because like I can take you around Kansas City and St. Joe around here and find there's an old Rock Island Jeep 7 in some paint scheme that still sits at a grain elevator up in St. Joe, Missouri. Yet to try to find an old GE U-boat from the 60s or what, it's like, oh yeah, no, they're all gone basically. So I'm eager to see how that pans out. But boy, the 50s, typical of EMD, yeah, they live long lives.
For sure.
Moving on to Bachmann, who will be at the St. Louis RPM. We'll see Matt Stern there, and he's going to have samples of a lot of his new stuff. I'm sure he'll have these air slides with him. The 4180 air slide is a new model for the Bachmann HO line, and there's a number of road names for those. Those are popular whether you're modeling when they were new in the 60s, or of course they're the sand or whatever cars in the oil can trains that you'll see an air slide, one end or the other of those trains.
Yeah, buffer service, right? Yeah,
buffer service. That's the word I'm looking for. And the Trinity Hopper is another. It's a 3-bay modern center flow that's also new. And I think Bachmann has shown a CSX version of that I had a number of people. Matt does really neat photography stuff, and I got to ask and confirm, but I think it's his model railroad, which, we interviewed him in the last year or so, and he's got the nice model railroad and it's actually done. I've said that to him before when I've done shows with him of the thing that really intrigues me is how you have a finished model railroad, and I've got a 4x8 sheet that I painted green.
Yeah. When I interviewed him a while ago, it was he had his railroad, but it didn't have a name, so I had to name the episode Matt Stern and the Railroad That Needs a Name is the name of the episode I interviewed him. So we'll have to also ask him if he's ever named this railroad.
Name the railroad, yeah. But he showed, I think in the last week, he does a new model Monday on Bachmann's Facebook, and he showed those Trinity hoppers in CSX, and it has like stormy clouds in the background, which you might have photoshopped that in, but the ground and everything in front of it's like, oh, that's a neat looking picture. I got to ask him if he took that. But that Trinity hopper is another new addition to Bachmann's HO line of rolling stock. We were talking in scale and how you can easily get lured into Broadway Limited in this Santa Fe 3751 heavy mountain steam locomotive. And Curtis Koch was telling me in this last week from Broadway Limited that they were out in Albuquerque, New Mexico, recording sounds from the real 3751.
Wow.
That'll be as part of the Paragon 4 sound system for this model. It's coming in HO, but it's also coming in scale, and we'll have smoke and all those features that the HO had. And I'm telling you, I've had more. I've even got two of my reviewers. You'll meet Shane, and I think I've talked to you before about Justin Sobek is another one. Justin lives in Pacific, Missouri on the southwest side of St. Louis with his family. Both those guys are big N-scalers, and man, the Santa Fe, I think they've messaged me basically saying, okay, what's the throwdown match? What do we, arm wrestling? What's the fight going to be? Because we both want that model. Which when I get those kind of messages, I always say, well, I hate it, but I'm going to keep it.
Yeah.
I'm not even an N-scaler, but I'm going to keep it now.
And you recently talked to Curtis about this on a live, didn't I notice you maybe doing something in the morning, maybe before a hot cup of coffee or something? Yeah.
I did. Yeah. Ken Bianco Jr. at Train World and James Wright and from JLW2, that does YouTube videos. James Wright, everybody knows James Wright, was on with us, and Curtis Koch from Broadway Limited were on this past week or so. We've done two shows now that start at 9 a.m. Eastern, which is 8 o'clock for me Central, and I keep joking that I either need to be ready to do a cooking segment or wondering why we don't have people shuffling around behind us waving in the windows at 30 Rock like the Today Show. But yeah, this and that, the time switch on those. In fact, when we went on the other morning, one of the first things, Ken puts up the comments from people was, "Are you guys really live right now?" And it's like, yes, yeah, we really are live right now this morning. And it's Ken Jr. just welcomed he and his wife their first baby. They got a little baby girl. And so
Awesome.
he says he can't work late because he's got, those responsibilities. So yeah, we've done a couple of morning shows, but that's a fun. The other thing we talked about on that show, well, we talked about a ton of stuff because Broadway, no one must sleep in Ocala, Florida, because Broadway is just so busy. But that Pennsy S1 steam locomotive is coming in HO as a brass hybrid, and it is an eye popper. And the two things, and I mentioned this on that show too, the two things I've been asked are, is it real or did they make that up? And then how many did Pennsy have if it's real? It's like, okay, it is real. There was just one though. And it was kind of that T1, that kind of shark nose looking steam locomotive, which is also a Broadway limited model in both HO and N. And it's a tremendous model, is kind of a relation to that one as far as the wheel arrangements and what it was. And it became the more successful of the two. But that S1 literally looks like when you see in cartoons or, like graphic stuff where somebody tries to show like an Art Deco, airplane, car, train. It's like, yeah, there really were not things like that with that kind of a bullet nose and this big, huge front pilot, hanging like 10 feet over. It's like, I'm sure that's a little exaggerated. And it's legit. In fact, as Curtis says, that model is bigger than a big boy.
Imagine being an engineer on this thing, because you got that massive long nose, and then they give you this incredibly small front windshield to look through. Like you couldn't see anything. I mean, you probably could see something a half a mile away, and then it goes away for, until you pass it. It's pretty crazy, but you nailed it. It's exactly that. It looks like something that was Art Deco from that era. Like, okay, let me draw the most wildest fantasy scheme ever, and then let's actually build it. And
exactly. Again. So I can see why I've gotten those messages of like, is that real or is that something that they conjured up? Because like, it looks like an exaggerated, like, well, that was the idea, but nobody really did things like that. But no, Pennsy S1, go to Broadway-limited.com to see both Santa Fe 3751, which there's several of those. I keep saying 3751, but there's a whole group. They're doing the in-service versions of those, of that mountain class of steam locomotives, as well as there's two road numbers for restored editions, so they'll have slightly different details. And that's both HO and N, and then HO is a brass hybrid. That Pennsy S1 is just amazing looking. They're doing the prototypical Pennsy scheme, a Tuscan red fantasy Pennsy scheme, and then at the 1939 New York World's Fair, it was decorated with American railroads on the side. And I think it was either Curtis or Ken Bianco Jr. from Train World was saying at that World's Fair, they actually had that S1 raised up like it was running in place so that the attendees of the fair could see it, and basically like it was on, like those little model train things you can buy to, that's like, I didn't know there were prototype versions of that. Wow.
Yeah.
But so that's very cool. But both those are awesome things coming from Broadway.
And we'll share a link to that recording of the live show that you did with Ken Bianco from Train World and Curtis Koch. And so we'll share that link in the show notes. And congratulations to Ken and the Bianco family.
And ScaleTrains at the N-Scale convention probably announced one of the biggest announcements for N-Scale this year, that collection of GP30s. And I keep looking at them. In fact, when I first looked at them, I thought, well, those are just the HO models. They're using those pictures. And then as I looked closer and saw the coupler and everything, it's like, wow, no, those are the N-Scale models. That wonderful group of GB30s that ScaleTrains brought out as rivet counter HO scale releases in the last year. And again, covered all kinds of things, the non-dynamic Chicago Northwestern, that CSX slug that's missing like all of its fans and grills. There's also Union Pacific Jeep 30Bs, which are odd ducks in two versions, one with steam generator, one without, and then regular cab Jeep 30s, late era Rio Grande. I mean, all kinds of great stuff. It'll be sound and non-sound, and it's all coming to N-Scale rivet counter line in the near future from ScaleTrains. So again, those N-Scalers, they say, hey, what about N-Scale? There they got their wish again, and that group of Jeep 30s is rolling from ScaleTrains.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, again, I try to show my love for N scalers, but when companies like ScaleTrains comes out with N scale stuff, I go, oh. I get excited. It's like, it's N scale. But yeah, no, it's great. And it's great the availability of the stuff that really, that's been seen in HO really coming out in N is awesome for our 1/160th friends for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then this past week, Walthers announced their July releases, and I saw the mainline series is getting that HO scale NW2 switcher is back. It will be available as a standard DC and also a DCC with sound. Their little switchers are excellent. If you haven't picked one of those up from that SW1 to some of the other SW series, and like this is an NW2, some of them have some proto heritage tooling, some of them are all new tooling, but a switcher is always something I think gets a little undervalued because we ooh and ah over, Centennials and Gevos, but in reality, working a model railroad, the mundane little switcher is a pretty important model. And these are priced very nice. They're in the mid-level mainline series. They've got good detail. And again, you can get DCC sound on them. I think of the road names I saw, that red and yellow Rock Island I really like. And then naturally that red and white Frisco is a pretty sharp looking model as well. And I think Walthers also does, I think there's an undeck and there's like a generic paint scheme. You can go to walthers.com and look for their just announced products, but they've done a nice, I can't remember what the two colors are, but there's a switcher that is kind of ready for you to do something with it. I think was in that group or has been done in the past, as well as just an undeck if you want to do the whole paint job yourself. The other new stuff from Walthers, the return of the Horizon fleet, passenger cars for Amtrak, and the 60-foot thrall material handling cars. Both of those originally landed in Walthers' line in 1998, basically when some of those were fairly new equipment on Amtrak. What's new this time around, like the Horizon cars will have car numbers on the sides. In the past, they always included, it was all lettered. It said Amtrak and said Coach or Dinette, but you had to decal the car number on the lower center side of the car. The car numbers are on both the cars, the coach and the food service cars, and they're doing phase 3 in narrow and wide stripes. That phase 4, which is like an early 90s era introduced Amtrak scheme, and then the more recent early 2000s phase 6 with the travel mark logo is going to be available for both, again, coaches as well as the food service cars. Those cars come with interiors. You can do an add-on light kit if you want to as well. They also have molded starter points to add some grab irons, which there's not a lot to add on to those. There's a couple of grabs on both sides of the doors going into the cars, and then I think the back along the lower lip by the coupler has a couple of grabs. So that's an easy, I would even consider getting out a drill and doing that work to that car to kind of to dress it up a bit. And you don't have to paint them because the Amtraks are stainless steel. So, and that's how those come. So that's a separate kit that they offer for the grab irons. And then you can also get the interior lighting kit, as the car does come with interior, but you can light it as well.
Yeah, and at $49.98 each MSRP, that's a pretty inexpensive way, to get it done.
Good deal in those cases. If you want to do the typical kind of, like the Chicago, St. Louis or St. Louis, Kansas City trains that I see, 2 or 3 coaches in a food service car, and you can do it all on a good budget. Yep. The other change I mentioned, the factory printed numbers, they're also going to come with drawbars for the first time. These have had body mounted couplers before, but I think the body mounted coupler maybe limits you to 24 radius. And so with the drawbar, I think you can cheat down to at least 22, maybe 18, but I don't see that in Walthers verbiage. I'm checking with Walthers to find out, but a drawbar will be a new thing there if you've got tight curves and are wondering about those. Those material handling cars, I always like those little AM boxes. And there'll be 2 phase 3s, one with the U.S. mail seal in the upper right, and then again that phase 4 scheme. And that's back in that era when Amtrak was running road railers and those like high cube AM boxes and these things, all that material handling or the package express stuff that they were doing. And boy, some of the gargantuan trains of seeing like the Southwest Chief with about, 30 cars, and half of it was material stuff. So you can recreate that with those. So fun to see those cars come back as well. And that again is another Walthers mainline release. The other Walthers thing that I thought was interesting, and I mentioned this when I was talking to the Spring Creek guy, saying, one of these days I'm actually going to have to build a model railroad.
Yeah, one day.
Rather than just having a test track, is there's a whole new group of Scene Master LED lighting and accessories. It's got a power supply that you plug in, and then it looks like it's kind of that easily connected up lighting system, that there's street lights, kind of like highway lights and lights for buildings, but a nice easy way to get to those, and all LED powered so they last forever. And that's also a new announcement. And again, all of that, you can find that. Walthers puts out a flyer each month, and walthers.com is the place to go for that stuff. But yeah, again, I see those. I think they show a picture of just like a street thing at twilight with all the street lights on. And again, I'm sure you're the same way. You see things like that, like, man, I need to model something like that.
Yeah.
I want to build that. I need to, where's a big piece of pink foam? I'm ready to start working.
That's right. Yeah. Get to work, get it done. And then all the items that Tony and I have discussed today, we'll all put it in the show notes, and you can find that at aroundthelayout.com/110. Well, Tony, it's been great catching up with you, finding out what's happening in model railroading this month. And I am really looking forward to seeing you in St. Louis, spending time with you both at the show and little time trackside with you and Shane and Andy and Mike and Matt and Kevin and all the folks that have been reaching out. On Saturday at 2 p.m., I'm going to go to the Spring Creek Model Trains table, and I will stand there. And if you want to come and say hello, if you haven't seen me, please stop by, say hello, tell me about yourself, and love to be able to meet you. So I'll also bring some stickers. I'll bring some other swag stuff that I'll be able to give away as well. So definitely stop and see me. I'll be more than happy to shake hands with you and chat.
Cool. So at the Spring Creek table at 2:00 on Saturday.
2:00 on Saturday. Yep.
I think Dave and Bruce are going to be the folks from Spring Creek that are working the show. So yeah, very cool.
Yep, looking forward to that, and looking forward to again spending time out there. And just can't wait to get on a plane and head to St. Louis.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it too. We're packing the car up and heading over Thursday.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.